just wanted to start out again by introducing myself. I'm Jennifer Chan. I'm a medical oncologist at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and I've had the privilege of being the president of NANETS for this past year. And I, along with Dr. Haft Anderson, who was here last year, am a co-chair of the NET working group and one of the U.S. cooperative groups, the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology. So I'm also very privileged to speak about meaningful involvement of patients in NET research. And again, just wanted to start by thanking everybody in the room for all that you're doing for the NET community. And also wanted to thank Theodora, Stephanie, the whole INCA community for this invitation to join you today and to be part of this conversation. So these are my disclosures. And I really just wanted to start out with this very simple graph that shows how much the research has evolved and increased over the past couple of decades. I just a couple weekends ago did a very quick PubMed search using simple search terms like neuroendocrine and carcinoid, and found that there was a threefold increase in the number of neuroendocrine-related research publications since 2000. And I think this really speaks to the growing interest and awareness of neuroendocrine cancers, as well as advances that have been made in technology that has facilitated research, as well as treatment that has increased the number of studies that we've been doing to investigate these options. So we've seen research advance across the entire cancer research continuum, and this includes basic science research, really aimed to understand some of the fundamental aspects of cancer biology and really provide a foundation for some of the advances that can be made. Clinical research, which is what I primarily do, which is research involving humans that aims to assess efficacy as well as safety of treatment. This is usually done through clinical trials as well as observational studies looking at certain outcomes. There's also translational research that really bridges what we see in the basic science labs and what we find in clinic, and helps us to understand whether lab discoveries can and how they translate into what we're seeing in clinic, and even vice versa, some of our clinical observations, and then trying to understand fundamentally what's driving that. There's also important population-based research that aims to explore why cancer exists in certain communities, some of the factors that affect delivery of care and outcomes in populations. And I think we've been seeing some of the epidemiologic research highlighted this morning about the increases that are observed in the incidence and prevalence of NETs. So I don't really have to tell everyone here, but this is where we know that patient involvement is critical in all aspects of research. And this is, I like this figure because it does show that patients are at the core and the center of what we do with all types of research, whether that's basic, preclinical, clinical research, and then the implementation science in public health. And the reason why patient involvement is so critical is that we increasingly are recognizing the value of this lived experience that both patients as well as their caregivers have. And the involvement of patient advocates in research ensures that our studies are relevant, they're patient-centered, and they're impactful for the outcomes of what we're really striving for our patients. So I wanted to, again, highlight a definition that has been used in the literature about what patient engagement in research is, because I think it highlights a few important points to keep in mind as we think about involvement in research and things we have to keep in mind. So engagement has been defined as an active, meaningful collaboration and interaction between advocates and research across all stages of the research process, not just at one time point. And it really is this bidirectional relationship between a patient advocate partner and researchers that, again, informs the decision-making process about what studies are done, how they're conducted, and how we use the results. This slide really shows that there are various levels of patient and researcher engagement in the health research continuum. And all of these are important, but I've highlighted some of the aspects of patient researcher engagement with the stars where there's much more patient advocacy involvement. But what is quite important is that patients, as we've heard earlier today, part of the participation process is really learning about the research, asking questions and finding out answers, participating as subjects in the research and in the clinical trials, even consulting during the process of research development to provide feedback on specific research questions and activities. As we get further into the involvement process, this is where patient advocates can work directly with the research team from start to finish in all aspects of the research, collaborate on equal footing with researchers in the research that's being done, and then also lead the work that's being done by making decisions about the questions that are being asked and how the answers will be obtained. And the benefits of involvement of patients in research from a researcher's perspective is that this is how we find out new perspectives that we may not be aware of and how we can prioritize new things. The involvement of patient advocates improves our understanding of the patient experience. It improves the relevance and the applicability of the research results, ultimately, as mentioned before, leading to patient-centered care. From a very practical and logistic aspect, and this was mentioned earlier today, the involvement of patients and your communities helps us to enhance recruitment to the studies so that we can find out answers more quickly. It also facilitates the dissemination of results and implementation of changes based on the research findings. And I think also most importantly improves relationships and trust between researchers and the communities that we're aiming to serve. From a patient and advocate perspective, participation in research has been shown to provide more knowledge about health and research. It also provides a sense of ownership of the research and empowerment. For some patients, it also fulfills a desire to make a difference for others and to contribute to overall better health care by ensuring that the research reflects patient priorities, not always researcher priorities, but patients' priorities to achieve the changes that are desired. Participation also allows patients and advocates to feel heard and valued, because for sure they are. And then there also is this concept of healing by participating in research and healing through advocacy. Much of the involvement of patients and advocates in research has been in the clinical research realm. It also occurs across all of the other types of research, but most of what we've seen focuses on clinical research and in many cases clinical trials. So this is what I'll focus on for much of my talk. And I just wanted to show this slide really to highlight the progress that has been made in treatment for neuroendocrine tumors over particularly the last 10, 15 years. And I've highlighted some of the key advances in terms of new drug approvals. And encouragingly, I think we're seeing an increasing number of options for our patients. So, what Lisa had mentioned about research and hope, I think this is what we're aiming for, is to have the work impact patients and to impact what we're as physicians able to offer. I'm showing this slide really to highlight, again, some of the more recent research that even in the last year or two has led to changes in the way that we practice. The NETTER-2 trial showing us the benefits of using lutetium-177 dotatate earlier for some of our patients with higher grade disease or higher risk disease. The CABINET trial, which I was privileged to be part of, showing that cabozantinib improves progression-free survival for patients with both pancreatic NET as well as extrapancreatic NET. And encouragingly this year, this led to a drug approval in the United States by the FDA and just within the last month or so in the EMA. So kind of it's actually one of the things I never thought I would see is like the work that I've been part of really impacting people, not just in my own community, but in the world. So it's other trials that have reported out just this year have been the COMPETE trial, showing that PRRT with lutetium-177 etotriotide has improved progression-free survival compared to everolimus, and I think that helps to inform decisions that we'll be making in clinic. LIGHTSPARK 15, which is a really important study looking at belzutifan for patients with pheopera. The results we're anxiously awaiting the presentation at ESMO this year, but based on the results showing a favorable response rate as well as reduction in blood pressure medications, there's yet another new drug that's available for this patient population. So the work we're doing is impacting patients, and I think the one other thing I want to point out is this is just highlighting a few of the recent trials, but there are so many trials that are ongoing now looking at other novel treatments. I think some of our industry partners are involved in these studies, and we're all anxiously waiting the results, but some of the agents are somatostatin agonists, the alpha-emitting radionuclides, novel tyrosine kinase inhibitors, cellular therapy like CAR-T, bispecific T-cell engagers, antibody-drug conjugates. So I'm confident with the work that is coming down the pipeline that we'll see that timeline I'd show you expand even more. So I hope this continues to provide hope for our communities. So getting back to patient engagement in clinical trials, one thing that was mentioned earlier when it comes to who is a patient advocate is that we know that patients and advocates have unique perspective, these lived experiences that really inform the research that we do. And some of the perspective that's provided is what it means to live with or manage a certain health condition, what the experience is with treatment, including side effects, and some of the burdens, whether it be health or financial, that is related to treatments. Some of the perspective is also related to what we want from treatment, what we expect from treatment to be worthwhile. It's also important to hear information about what the tolerance for certain risks and side effects are so we can think about weighing risk-benefit. The other important point is that there are views on potential outcomes and the importance of outcomes. And this, as we are designing research, helps us to pick endpoints and decide what is meaningful or not. And the other important perspective is on views about what is available and what some of the unmet needs are. So the clinical trial process involves a number of different steps, and at each step along the way, there is a role for patient involvement. So I'll just kind of walk through some of the steps here. And the first is with actually deciding to do the study, initiating the trial, coming up with the design, and then ultimately developing the protocol. We heard from Danielle about this in the morning, but the role of patient advocates is to provide input on the design of the study, what's important, and also giving feedback about what's practical and whether the design aligns with what is actually viewed as important. The other important area where patients and advocates can provide important input is during the recruitment process and the consent process. And it helps us as researchers, the input, to understand what the barriers are to potential participation. I'll speak about this a bit later, but for instance, when we were designing the cabinet trial, it was important during discussions to hear about how do people feel about placebo controls? How do people feel about certain randomization schemes? So this is really important to identify barriers, because I think the last thing anybody wants to do is really design a study, but then have nobody enroll. The other important piece where patients provide important input is on the informed consent process, what's important to share. The forms are reviewed to make sure everything that's important is covered by that. And then during the actual process of having the trial open, advocates and communities can help to facilitate enrollment by increasing awareness. During the process of the trial being open, there's important input about really some of the logistical things about where the study should be open, if it's not enrolling well, where are some of the other sites that could be considered. And then also patients and advocates are serving on monitoring committees, really to help us make sure that these trials are safe. Another important part for patient engagement is with the design and data capture. And this probably goes a little bit earlier as we're thinking about endpoints, but it's important to understand what information is important that we need to kind of prospectively collect so that at the end of the day, we've answered the questions and made sure that we collected the information. As mentioned before, there's also an importance of trying to understand what the priorities are so again, that we can measure those outcomes. Lisa alluded to this earlier this morning about how important it is to get the word out, because we want patients to be aware of the results. So this is where patient advocates can, within communities, share the word about results, share their experience about participating in the trial. And I think we also, as investigators, want to hear feedback about what that was like so that we can, as we design future studies, improve on that. And speaking about future studies, again, the experience help us inform what we need to be measuring, and then our goal really is continuous improvement. So I just wanted to share an example of, for instance, the cabinet trial, which was conducted within the NCI's National Clinical Trials Network. Dr. Del Rivero is also leading a trial in patients with pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma, looking at temozolomide with olaparib. And in the US, we have what's called the National Clinical Trials Network that's sponsored by the NCI. And this is a collection of organizations and clinicians that support research at cancer centers across the U.S., over 2,200 sites, and there's a framework that the NCI has for centralizing the work that's done. Within the U.S., there are 5 main cooperative groups where the research is conducted, and it's all centrally supported by the National Clinical Trials Network. So I am an investigator at Dana-Farber, which is part of the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology. And as we were designing the cabinet trial, these are the stages of trial development that the protocol went through. And all of our protocols start with an idea for a trial. Oftentimes, that's an investigator who comes up with a proposal, and the proposal is developed within the disease committee. So within the Alliance, the neuroendocrine tumor protocols are vetted within the neuroendocrine tumor working group. The concept is then written based on that feedback. It's reviewed, and again, Danielle mentioned this, it's reviewed by the NCI's Neuroendocrine Tumor Task Force, which is, again, a collection of investigators, also patient advocates that review the protocol. It then moves along another review process within the Alliance, ultimately to the NCI's steering committee, and then the final protocol is written. At every step along the way, there is an opportunity for patient advocate involvement, starting, as mentioned, with the working group. And also, there are patient advocates involved in the Neuroendocrine Tumor Task Force, the Alliance's Scientific Review Committee, the NCI Steering Committee. And then as the protocol is written, again, this continuous feedback to make sure that the trial is answering important questions and designed with patients in mind. And some of the areas where patient advocate input is quite critical is with reviewing the importance of the concept, the design and the schema of the trial, assessment of risks and benefits, and the burden that the trial may place based on the schedule of required activities. This also is an important point, is a review of the eligibility criteria, the inclusion, the exclusion criteria. We really want to make sure that we have input on elements that will make sure that the trial is representative of as many patients as possible. Some trials where the exclusion criteria are so tight or the exclusion so broad, you at the end of the day have a result, but it may not apply to everybody that you want to be able to treat. We also assess accrual feasibility and additional patient-centered comments. So these are very helpful elements during the protocol review process. There has been work done also, not just on where can patients be involved in the research process, but I think also importantly, making sure that it is meaningful. And I wanted to highlight one study related to neuroendocrine tumors that involved 19 experienced patient research partners in Canada to explore experience and preferences for engaging with healthcare teams. And the paper highlights elements that are important for the engagement process. And this is the research environment, making sure that this is a team atmosphere where all voices are heard and where people feel like all voices count. What's also important is the expectations for everybody who's part of the team, especially patient advocates. What is the definition of the role? And also making sure that during the whole process there is some closure, that everybody knows the outcome of the research that's done. There's also a need for support, and that ranges from concrete issues like financial support, administrative support, and also importantly, and I think Michelle, you'd mentioned this about preparation for the role. There also is a need for people to feel valued, so this mutual benefit through patient participation and co-learning from one another. So I just wanted to highlight, again, some of the challenges, some of the things that we think will enable engagement to be meaningful. Some of the challenges relate to infrastructure and resources, time and logistics for patient advocate involvement, training, communication barriers, this risk of what's been referred to as tokenism, where patients are involved in the research process, but they don't always feel like they're contributing, or they don't know what they need to be contributing. And then there also is researcher resistance, where researchers may not necessarily be as open and welcoming of patients into the environment. But I think one of the, some of the things that can help overcome some of these challenges are, and I won't read through the whole list, but ensuring that there are sufficient resources, establishing mechanisms to involve advocates early, not just at the end as results are being reviewed, but really involving advocates throughout that entire course of the research process, training and support, making people feel valued by acknowledging their contributions and committing to change and learn about the research through evaluations that are being done. So again, there is a range of activities, a range of meaningful involvement of patients in research, and I just wanted to highlight again some of the things that we've talked about during my talk today, but as well as things that we've heard about through the entire morning. And some of that is shaping research initiatives by collecting information about what the needs really are. Once a project's been developed, providing input on that research project to make sure that we're looking at the right things that will impact patient care. Some of the logistical things are making sure people are aware of the opportunities to participate in review committees. It's not just clinical trials where advocacy is important, but also working on guidelines and quality initiatives that shape the care that we're delivering and the implementation, and then partnering in patient-centered outcomes research. And I don't need to tell everyone here because you're doing all of the work that I've talked about, but I think we've seen, even over the last several years, an increase in patient advocacy involvement in research. And as we look at publications that are coming out, the number of studies that have advocacy involvement or that are advocacy-led has been increasing. Some of these studies we've already heard about today, but as we look on the right side of the screen about clinical trials that are going on, that top one, Josh Mailman, is a member, a patient advocate member of the steering committee that is involved in kind of review continuously of the trial that's going on and even involved in the design of the trial. Some of the other research that's being done related to trial involves like these survey results to, again, make sure that we're capturing patient experience. And as mentioned before, the types of research and work that's being done extends to clinical guidelines work where, again, it's so important not just to hear the voice of the physicians, but the patients. And I just want to commend everybody and thank everybody for their participation in this type of work because it really does influence the way we care for patients. So in summary, patient advocacy provides critical input on all aspects of research, but it's something that we really need to plan for. So as researchers, we're designing trials, we need to plan for and provide sufficient resources for patient advocate involvement. The roles should be defined, and its training also is necessary. So it is really great to see the workshops that have been developed so that we can increase the pool of patient advocates who are involved in research so that we're hearing not just one or two voices, but many voices to reflect the neuroendocrine patient experience. Collaboration and partnership with everything we do, but especially with research, is key. And then ultimately involving the voices of patient advocates enhances the design of trials that are done, the impact of research studies, and it helps us to achieve what we really want, which is improved outcomes for patients. So I will end there and just wanted to thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to continuing this dialogue.
Thank you.